Yeah, okay, anyway.
Oh, okay. You won't be preaching, you'll just be doing handy
Yeah,
stuff.
okay.
They get to work on the bathrooms this week.
Yes, let's not go there because I'm live.
Don't get you started.
That's right. I'm sorry, everyone, we got into a parsonage discussion, and those are always gross. But anyway, welcome. I'm Dennis Levin. I'm pastor for the day at Queen Street United Methodist Church here in Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly Bible study. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 18, very interesting part of chapter 18. And it's picking up at verse 15. I think given what we are going through as a nation today, that this is prescient. This is something that's extremely relevant to us as we consider where we are, where we're going, and things like that. So, chapter 15.
15?
I'm sorry, chapter 18, verse 15. It's been a long holiday. Okay. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. Now, this is Moses speaking, okay? A prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, if I hear the voice of the Lord my God any more or ever again, see this great fire, I will die. So he's saying, if God has to come down and present himself like he did at Horeb again, then you're done, okay? Nobody can see what you saw again and live, which is kind of an interesting thing. Why would he say something like that? Well, for one thing, it puts a finality on the prophecies of Moses. So Moses is saying, if you're ever in a situation where God has to come down like he did for us at Horeb, then you're in big trouble. So don't go there.
Now, was Horeb where he gave them the Ten Commandments?
It was Sinai.
So what was Horeb? I don't remember that assembly.
I know, that's the problem. Like I say, we have gone through, this is the last book of the Pentateuch, and in some places, there are areas where nothing in the Pentateuch lines up. Okay? So, just for your information, this is not a consistent history, and it doesn't go by the standards that we set for historians today. Okay, although some of the standards we set for historians today don't matter to some historians. Okay. Then the Lord replied to me, they are right in what they have said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their own people. I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to them everything that I command. Anyone who does not heed the words of the prophet shall speak in my name. I myself will hold accountable. But any prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, or who presumes to speak my name, in my name, a word that I have not commanded the prophet to speak, that prophet shall die. You may say to yourself, how can we recognize a word that the Lord has not spoken? If a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, but the thing does not take place or prove true, it is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be frightened by it. Okay. Okay, herein lies a problem. Okay. How long are you going to give the prophecy to come true? Okay. In some of these cases, the prophecies didn't come true for 800-900 years. Okay. We look at some of the prophecies about Christ, and Isaiah had a lot of prophecies about who the Messiah would be. Well, the Messiah didn't come in Isaiah's time, didn't come in the time right after Isaiah, didn't come for hundreds and hundreds of years after Isaiah. So how do you know that Isaiah was valid? How do you know that he was true? And when he sets a word out, like we're looking at the Old Testament, and we're seeing some of the things in the Old Testament have come true. Okay? They didn't come true when they were written. They were written in great hope, and they were written in great expectation, but they weren't coming true. And some of them have not come true even today. So we're still waiting on some of these prophecies. So how many prophets got whacked because their prophecies didn't come true? I mean, you can look at some of this stuff and see, okay, sometimes the prophecies were relevant for the time that they were living in, okay? We've taken a lot of Isaiah's prophecies that had to do with Isaiah's time and transposed them over into our New Testament understanding of who Christ is. Matthew was famous for doing this sort of thing. But just because a prophet's prophecy doesn't come true in the days of the prophet doesn't mean the prophecy isn't true. Okay? So what are you really looking for? Shouldn't be looking for these standards in whether or not what a prophet says is true. The standard that you need to look at prophecies, to use to look at prophecies and understand them and to see whether or not they're relevant or realistic, is whether or not in our history and life experiences we see that the principles involved in the prophecies are true, generally speaking. Okay? So when prophets call for justice, when prophets call for the society to reform, to come back to the standards that God has set for the people, when we see those prophecies where people actually come back to some of the standards that God has set and things start to work out, okay? You have to look at prophecies. When I read the Bible, I look for big T's and little t's. I look for big truths and little truths, okay? Little truths are kind of tactical. They have to do with what's going on right then, or how people understood things to be, or the way a culture functioned at the time, okay? But big truths are eternal. Big truths are words that work forever. And if you want to see why it is that certain prophets were included in the Old Testament, even though their prophecies didn't come true for generations past their lifetimes, the principles that they were espousing were the kinds of principles that the people should be following. So, I mean, Amos was famous for railing against injustice in society, okay, but they didn't become a just society, and they got severely punished for not being a just society in the long run. So in the long run, Amos was right, okay? In his immediate time frame, people pretty much ignored him or considered him a pariah. Jeremiah was a pariah in his day. So you have to be careful about how you assess prophecies. And okay, what's going on today? Are there prophets today? Last Sunday, I talked about some people that I've known in my churches who were actual prophets. And they were strange. They were not normal. They saw things that other people didn't see. They had visions. And they weren't schizophrenic. Okay, I've worked around schizophrenics. These are not schizophrenic people. These visions and voices that they heard were of a very spiritual nature. And if they ever came to me and said, God wanted me to tell you this, I said, okay. And they would say it, and they said, I don't know why God wanted me to tell you that, and I knew immediately why God wanted me to hear that, okay? A lot of times it was an affirmation of something that we were doing. And but it was something that wasn't obvious to everybody at the time. And all of a sudden, there was this insight that came. And when I encounter somebody like this, you know, I have a background in working with mentally ill people. And so I'm careful to differentiate what's going on, because I've had some mentally ill people in my churches too. Okay? Generally speaking, they were not prophetic. They were just off. But you know, some things that you hear from people like this are strange and bizarre. Some of the things that I heard from some of the prophets in the church were kind of reminiscent of how you would look at the book of Daniel or Ezekiel. Oh, you know, what the heck is this? You know, I don't know what it is. It was weird. A lot of times the prophet had no idea what the vision meant. And so if they came to me and said I had this vision, I would try to explore with them what message that vision actually had. And it was really hard because they were not attuned to interpreting the vision, but they had it and they said it. And sometimes the visions made sense, and sometimes they just didn't seem to. But knowing the rest of the story about these people and how they presented themselves and what they were conveying, I don't know to this day what some of those visions meant. Okay, but I know that this person had a pipeline to the Almighty.
You know, it gets back to you have to wonder, is this guy a voice of God? Is this guy a kook? Mm-hmm. And even it says in the Bible about be careful of, you know, soothsayers and all these people. You see them, I mean, I've never been to one, but you see these little places.
Yes.
Come see Mama Leone, she'll read your future. And the tea.
No, Mama Leone had a really good restaurant in New
really
York.
did.
That was good.
I would believe what she said. Very good Italian restaurant in New York. But anyway, I don't know how that popped in my mind. But my point is, and in this even verse it says, if it's a prophet, but what he says does not come true, then he's not a prophet from me, from God. Well, a lot of prophets said things that didn't come true in their time.
That's correct.
So how do you
Big T,
this out?
big T, little t, okay? The truth that they're conveying, is it an eternal truth? Okay? Or are they just trying to read what's going on in society today?
Especially if it's somebody who doesn't know you, doesn't know your background or anything, and then they just come out of nowhere with a message of God. And if what you're doing in your life lines up with what they're saying, I've had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I believe it then. Because then it prompts me to ask God for forgiveness and
Well,
better. But
yeah.
mental illness, now may I say, is not all people being all. It runs all in my family, they're sick. They have got medicine to help with that.
Yeah.
I just want the hearers out there to know that.
Well,
So,
one of the things that I found true about the relevance is whether or not when that person comes to me with a message for me, that I find that message to be actually relevant
Right.
to what's going on. Most of the messages that I've gotten from prophets have been endorsements of what I was trying to do. They didn't, thankfully I wasn't David and Nathan, you know, but the insights were welcome. And these people had visions sometimes during worship service. Not that they stood up and said, "Oh, I see this." They didn't do that. They would come to me later and said, "You know, there was kind of a glow around you when you were bringing that message." And I thought, well, you know, I didn't feel like I was lighting anything up at the time, but you know, they were able to give me an affirmation of what I was trying to get across at the time, even though I really wasn't seeing anything. But I've had several instances where that's happened. God endorsed the message more than God endorsed me.
Right.
I've had that same
Uh-huh.
experience.
Yeah.
People come and say something, and I'm like, you know,
How do they know?
yeah, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. There are people who have that gift. It is one of the gifts of the Spirit. Prophecy is one of the gifts of the Spirit. Okay? And I think it's interesting that in the gifts of the Spirit, you also have the gift of tongues. Okay? But then there's a separate gift, which is the interpretation of tongues. So the person is saying something and they have no idea what they're saying, but somebody else in the congregation might be able to interpret that. And Paul says, if you haven't got both around, don't do it.
Right. The Bible does say that.
Yeah. Okay, because it makes no sense. People just think you're nutso when you start babbling. And unless there is somebody who really does have the gift of interpreting tongues, because this is not a language like any other. It's called glossolalia, and it is present, by the way, in the Old Testament as much, even more so than it is in the New.
I've seen that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now there have been other instances, scripturally and in our church experience, not this church, but where the gift of tongues actually includes a language. And in the day of Pentecost, the disciples were speaking Aramaic. It says they were speaking in other tongues. They were actually speaking in Aramaic as far as they were concerned. But everybody in the crowd, no matter what their language, was able to understand what they heard. Okay? So the gift wasn't so much of tongues as it was of hearing. We had an event before my time. In our annual conference, we had a missionary, not a missionary, we had a minister who came from an Arabic country. And he did not speak English. And so they had an Arabic interpreter to interpret his speech. And so he came up before the conference and was giving a message about Christianity in his country. And he was speaking in Arabic. And the interpreter was interpreting and speaking English. And after a while, the interpreter stopped interpreting. And the guy turned to him and said, "Why aren't you interpreting?" And he says, "Because you're speaking perfect English." So these things happen. These things happen. And it's a gift of the Spirit. And it has so much less to do with the person who is giving the speech than it does from what the speech actually is. And that's one of the things that I watch for when somebody says, "Well, I have the gift of tongues." Fine. Okay, how do you present that? How do you present the gift of tongues? Is it something that you're doing, dancing around and calling attention to yourself? Or are you actually trying to get a message across to the congregation? Or to other people? Is it something that's calling attention to you, or is it something that's calling attention to the message? And one of the things that you see with the day of Pentecost is that it was in the morning, and the crowd was saying, "What's with these guys? They're drunk." Okay? And Peter says, "No, it's too early to get drunk." Okay? And then he went immediately into the message. He says, "We're not drunk. Here's the message." And the message was about Christ. And the people heard it and understood it. So, and they go through a variety of languages, So Peter immediately called attention away from himself and onto the message. Whereas a lot of people who are evidencing tongues within some denominations, some religions, Christianity, the gift of tongues is more an evidence that the person is filled with the Holy Spirit than it is that the person is actually giving you a message. So the demonstration of tongues is more to demonstrate my holiness than it is to demonstrate what it is I have to say that God is giving me to say.
But how do you know, getting off the, just go back to a guy like Oral Roberts.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think we're all old enough. to-
Who was, by the way, an unordained local United Methodist pastor for a while.
You know, and I don't remember, I just remember my grandparents. They watched him every Sunday, I think he came up. And from what little bit I saw, his message was okay. I mean, his message was God and Jesus Christ, but send me money. That was his message.
Shazam!
And the people sent him money, my grandparents sent him money. It just, the whole deal to me, I'm very cynical, I always have been. But I think a guys like him, it's just a scam.
Not me, I'm not cynical at all. I believe everything Oral Roberts ever said.
He started university.
Yeah.
I don't know what he did with all the money, but he did
The
his word,
yeah.
from what I can remember when I was a child, but it didn't really contradict what God said, but you don't know what his heart was. Was his heart was, I'm trying to save these people, or is his heart, I want to get this money? And to me, he wanted to get this money. So the whole prophecy deal just opens up a can of worms. to me.
It does. It does.
What about Dr. David Jeremiah and Billy Graham Sr.?
Billy Graham Sr. was not in it for the money.
Billy Graham Sr. was probably,
That's why I
in
wanted
my
to
opinion,
ask.
Billy Graham Sr. probably was the closest thing I know of to a prophet.
And
in
now
my
his son looks identical.
His son is a different story, but I think Billy Graham was a prophet, or close to it.
Well, you
I'm
know,
sorry,
there was a
Bob.
time, a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, we were putting signs up in the parking lot. And we were having a really hard time doing it because that parking lot is covered with blacktop, but under the blacktop is concrete. And we got down below the blacktop, but we couldn't get into the concrete. And so it was really hard because we were trying to hammer into it and everything, and it just was not working. I said, look, I've got a hammer drill at home that'll take this out. So I drove all the way back to Aden, got my hammer drill, and brought it out. It's a monster, and it's got a I can put a chisel point on that thing, and it'll just right in, and it did. All of a sudden we were making holes in the concrete, and John was working with me, and I told John, I said, if I'd known I was this good a chiseler, I'd have been a televangelist instead of a pastor. No, the breaking point with Oral Roberts was when he decided to recarpet his office and took up the old carpet and was selling squares from his old carpet, the prayer rug. And if you get one of these and pray, then your prayers will be answered. And, okay. All of a sudden he's selling indulgences, and that kind of broke. He wasn't a local pastor in the United Methodist Church after that. So, that's too much of a stretch.
I think sometimes too, when somebody prophesies over an individual and they say this or that's going to take place and it doesn't happen.
Right.
And then when it doesn't happen, it's due to lack of faith.
Yes, it's my problem.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you got to be careful.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's my lack of faith. Dang. I had some faith when I came to you, but then it didn't happen, and I realize now that it wasn't your fault. It's all about me. And there is that thing, and Jesus went to his hometown and couldn't do any miracles because people they had no faith. Okay, that's right. All right. But I must have had a little if I came up to the guy and asked for some healing or something. I must have had some kind of faith to do that, but and he said just a grain of mustard seed would all it would take. I figured that would be it, but no. Couple of things you look out for. with false prophets. One of them is that what they're saying doesn't make any sense at all. Okay? And the other thing is that they benefit somehow from the prophecy. Most prophets don't benefit from the prophecy, or they put their lives at risk in coming up with it, like Nathan, you know. They're not self-seeking. One of the problems that I have with the prophet Samuel is that virtually everything he did in prophecy was self-seeking and self-serving, because he did not want the king to have his power. So, you know, he fomented a coup and everything else. Everything that Samuel did, he did for his own aggrandizement. And Samuel, if you look at it, his kids were just as corrupt as Hophni and Phinehas, you know. So he was a corrupt man. And I don't like a lot of the things that Samuel came up with, because he was genocidal. He betrayed the king that he crowned, you know. I don't like Samuel. Too self-seeking. I know that he was considered a great prophet, but I don't think he was such a great guy. And I can have my opinions. And you know, I'm pretty far down inside this church building, and I don't know that lightning can get this far down. So. But I'm just saying.
Okay, so I'm gonna move a little further away.
I'm going, yeah, that's right. Come on, just step back, preacher. But yeah, this issue of prophecy is important, because one of the things that you're finding in the United States, in our society today, is that there are some religious leaders who will apply their prophecies to political issues. Sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes it's really not. Sometimes it's just in favor of a particular candidate. I've seen the worst scoundrels get up in churches and politic from pulpits. You know, how does that happen? You know, and that's, oh, I'm so glad he's here, and we're just going to endorse this guy, and blah blah blah. You know, I get tired of that mess. Especially when I have been warned over and over again, when these rules applied from Lyndon Johnson's time, that if a church got political, they could lose their nonprofit status. I mean, I had letters every time there was an election warning me not to get too political, or the church would lose their nonprofit status. And I wonder, what organization is coming after us like this? It wasn't a government letter, but it was definitely a threat. You know, and I think certain ethnicities were more prone to getting those letters than others. So anyway, this is an important issue for us, because there are false prophets all over the place, and with social media, they've just proliferated, and we can see what false prophets are doing with our children. They're driving them to depression and suicide, making prophecies about you're never going to be popular, and da-da-da-da. Watch where the source is. Where are they getting their information? Do they have any authority to be able to make a criticism of the children that they're addressing? There are false prophets out there that will drive children away from their parents. There are false prophets that will drive people away from their churches and from their faith. They're all over the place. They're all over the place. When you go by Madame So-and-so's, Mama Leone palm reader stuff, where does Mama Leone's palm reading material come from? Okay? And it didn't come from Christianity, I can tell you that. You start going to Sears and things like that, and it can put you in deep trouble. You know, Saul was driven to that, and it cost him. But he was driven to that by a holy man. So, you know, there's evil on both sides. You need to be careful, because the world right now is full of false prophets. And some of them look like prophets, and some of them look like politicians. So, and some of them just look like mean middle schoolers. Okay, chapter 19. We're at the end of this. So we're going to pick up chapter 19 next week. Chapter 19 has some really interesting governmental insights. And I recommend that you take a look at it, because you look at this thing and you say, oh, that's what's wrong with society today. Okay? But welcome, be a part of our thing. If you want to respond to anything, I haven't been able to respond to any of the posts that you've been making while we've been. There's some of the stuff that I see here is stupid. Doesn't belong on the site. But if you want me to respond reasonably and responsibly, good luck with that. But the other is you can email me at revlev@nccumc.org. See you next week.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Thank you.